1 second. Sounds about right. Hey, I claim that artificial intelligence and AI-generated images are the best thing that has happened to photography. And before you violently disagree with me, let me try to explain what I mean. I'm not interested in AI-generated images at all. If you are, all power to you. I'm interested in this development and what does AI do to photography. That's my point of view. So, AI is the best thing that has ever happened to photography. Now, let's take a little bit more historic perspective because we just can't jump into today's situation without having the context. Before the invention of photography, the only way to get images was painting or drawing. If you would need a portrait of yourself, you would hire a painter and he would come and paint your picture. If you run a magazine or a newspaper, you would hire illustrators who would draw or paint pictures to your publication. A wealthy mansion owner might hire a painter to paint his mansion and the pond behind it, and then he would put it on the wall and brag about it. So painters were hired guns who would work for somebody and paint what was ordered. Not everybody, there were a handful of free radicals, subsidized by kings and queens or who received a big inheritance from their late father and then had enough money to go and paint whatever they wanted. But the big bulk of painters were hired guns for magazines, newspapers, portraits, all kind of illustrations. Then everything started to change when photography was invented. And only 30 years after the very first photography in 1855, British photographer Roger Fenton traveled to Crimea and photographed the war going on in Crimea. And he sent over 300 wet plate images back to London for newspapers that then published his pictures. That was the first time there was war illustrations from a photographer published in a newspaper. And that was the beginning of the end for all kind of magazine and newspaper illustrations. At the same time, of course, the same happened to elsewhere in painting. If you would need a portrait of yourself, instead of hiring this expensive painter, you would call a photographer. They would come in and take a picture or two. So suddenly the whole landscape of painting changed, and all these everyday sort of business-oriented imaging situations that were formerly conducted by painters and drawers, now suddenly photography started to eat that lunch, started to take the role there more and more. It also democratized a lot of imagery. Like everybody can get their pictures taken. So photography changed the painting and made a lot of painters and drawers without a job. So there was of course a huge cry and controversy about how this photography, this new technology is eating our lunch. But if we now ignore that and take a look at it from the painting point of view, not from the painter's point of view, photography created the art of painting. Because now it liberated painting from those everyday tasks of newspaper illustration, of portrait of this ugly rich woman, or sales brochure when I'm trying to sell my mansion. Those were all taken by those pictures by photographers, so now painters needed to go elsewhere, and the art of painting was created, largely, And now painters could just pour their soul into the paintings and paint whatever they wanted to do. The hired gun business was gone. The art was the new way to go. Some artists were good enough to make a living out of it. But photography liberated painting to be an art form. 150 years later, same happens again. Digital photography comes into play. And suddenly, you wouldn't need the skills of a film photographer, developing and working in a dark room or whatever. You just take a picture with the digital camera, send it online to the newspaper, and they could print it on the newspaper, next day newspaper. Faster, simpler, better quality, cheaper. So no wonder digital took over all aspects of photography, and those who stick with analog were suddenly out of work. But then the same thing that happened between photography and painting happened between film photography and digital photography. So digital photography actually liberated film photography for greater things. Now film photographers, those who chose to continue with this, didn't need to do the boring daily business-oriented stuff. It was the digital photographers who went and took the pictures of the apartments for sale, or portrait pictures of a newborn baby, or wedding images, or images for this new website or newspaper. All digital stuff. Nobody needed film anymore. So film photographers, those who stick to that, started to experiment more and more with film and its special characters. And if you ever wanted to continue that trade, I claim that you needed to go artistic and you needed to create something unique, pour your soul into your pictures. Otherwise, it really didn't make any sense. So one might argue that digital photography liberated film photography for greater things, for fun, enjoyment, and art. And digital now takes care of all the boring daily business stuff. And now here comes artificial intelligence. Suddenly, if you need an illustration for your corporate slide set, or you need a stock photo of a flower, you don't need to go and photograph anything. You just, with a couple of keystrokes, you generate it to yourself. All the most beautiful girls on Instagram are AI generated. The most striking landscape, they are all AI generated. So little by little, AI is making certain type of photography obsolete. You don't need those stock type of photos anymore. And you don't need those sunset photos. You don't need those plain old portrait photos of an unknown person for your commercial or for your advertisement. You can generate them. They are free of copyright, so you can use them anywhere you want, and you don't need to deal with difficult photographers. Now, when progress happens, it's always painful. There will be people who will be opposing that. Mostly those who are deep in the old way of doing and can't see the way forward. It's the photographers who are mostly opposing AI-generated images. And they are crying of AI stealing their work and copyrights and whatnot. But at the same time, AI can liberate those of us who can be liberated. And we can go with photography to places that we haven't gone before. Because AI now takes care of stock photos and commercials and illustrations and advertisements and sunsets and beautiful girls. We can go elsewhere. I think that's exciting. There's some pain involved, but I still have a strong opinion that AI is going to be the best thing that ever happened to photography. I stick to that. Hey, thanks for watching. Next time, something else.